The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts. Kia ora tātou and welcome to Gone By Lunchtime, the Spinoff's politics podcast. Hot dives, deep takes, and we're all in Halloween costume today. Annabelle Lee, how are you?
I'm very well, Toby. Kei te pēhea koe.
Kei te pai.
Ka pai.
Ben, kei te pēhea koe. Ben Thomas, from Exceltium.
Hello.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good. My today is a bit rusty.
My name is Toby Manhire, I should have mentioned. Annabelle Lee is from The Hui, which is on TV3 on Sundays at
9:30.
And reeling in towards Christmas. When's your last episode?
December 3.
December 3, I think it's the same as The Nation. It's when they have their breakfast champagne thing. You going to go along to that?
Possibly.
Ben Thomas, how's the world of political public relations?
It's good, telling the truth well, doing good things for the people of New Zealand.
You seem a little bit subdued today. You don't seem quite your normal. You seem a little. Is everything all right?
It's the Spinoff stairs. You guys are up 3 stories. Yeah. I'm usually kind of gasping for breath, and today I decided to conserve my energy. I sort of took about 5 or 6 minutes getting up and stopped for breathers. So.
I stop on the 2nd floor and just try and regain an air of to composure.
Yeah, I sometimes do.
And then make my last charge.
And then do the last flight,
but
2 stairs at a time. Hey, everyone, here I am.
Yeah.
Fit as a fiddle.
You guys need to get rid of all of your sort of millennial Swiss balls and arcade machines and fire poles and just get a lift.
Toe took all that.
Can we talk about Saudi sheep very briefly? We've been... cruelly, the gods have thrust the Saudi sheep report into what went down with that agri-hub in Saudi Arabia. The gods have decided to publish that auditor-general inquiry immediately after we finish this podcast. So we're slightly kind of running in the dark here. But essentially, Ben Thomas, the question will immediately be, once the auditor-general reports is published, is whether or not Murray McCully can survive.
Yeah, and look, obviously we don't know what's in the report yet. If I had to make a guess from this position, I'd say McCully will go. It won't be linked to the report. But a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister, in his role as political pundit, thinking man on the street, guessed casually that he expected there might be a couple of resignations from cabinet before the next election. Very presciently, as it turned out, then Hekia Parata offered her resignation of her own free will mere days afterwards, and that leaves one more for the Prime Minister.
If McCully were to go, though, for him, it's pretty hard to make it seem as though it's not related to this report now, isn't it? I mean...
Oh, look, yeah, exactly. But you can always say, things have come up. You've decided on new priorities in your life, and
he has been in Parliament since dinosaurs were roaming the earth. To be fair, so yes. You would expect that he can't go on indefinitely.
That's true. What are your tea leaves telling you?
I personally would be surprised if he'd go, just because he's such a power broker within National, or at least used to be.
Yeah, one of the things they say is that he knows where the bodies are buried, that he's this sort of Machiavellian force. True.
It's a really puzzling assertion that people make. When you say, he knows all the secrets. Well, if he knows them, someone else must know them. But nobody ever gets a kind of sniff of what the particular secrets are that he knows.
When you read Hollow Man,
we're into deep sort of unknown territory. I think a lot of that is a bit overblown. I think he's good at getting close to leaders, and he's apparently a good strategist during campaigns. But I think the sort of mafioso kind of reputation is a little overplayed, as most people in politics try and overplay their reputations in that way.
It's been a long time since I've read Hollow Men, but there's sort of that kind of stuff going down in there, isn't there? Like he takes care of sort of dirty work that others might not like to do.
I guess that's sort of the stereotype. I mean, it's difficult to know.
It's always hard to tell with Nikki Hager books because they're sort of reported with such breathless wonderment and shock. There was one chapter with McCully where McCully wrote some lines, about what the leader should say on a TV interview if asked about a particular topic. And Hager affected this kind of disbelief and awe that, they might not just make up their answers on the spot, after deep consideration following the interviewer's question. So, I think all of this kind of shadowy figure, background power broker stuff, it's always in everyone's interests to kind of promote themselves in that way. But I'm not too sure how much reality there is behind it.
What will he do afterwards, do you think? Will he become the Minister of, Trade and the Middle East or something?
Maybe get a special envoy role for agri-hub based diplomacy.
Retire to a sheep farm on the South Island.
We should say, I suppose, that the one of the questions that the auditor-general is looking into, which you probably will have read about by the time you listen to this, is whether or not the cash payment, among other things, including flying sheep, that was provided to Al-Khalaf was really required or not, because McCully had argued that there was a legal threat and there doesn't seem to have been much paperwork. So we'll find out. Or you've probably already found out and you're sitting there smiling and thinking, these guys had no idea what was going to be in there. They had no clue. Moving on. You mentioned the departure of Hekia Parata, and we had two kind of high-profile exits or announced exits in the last fortnight. The first being Hekia Parata, the second being David Cunliffe. Should we start with Hekia Parata, Annabelle? What do you think her legacy is? Obviously there were a few snafus in there and a few backtracks and quite a lot of waffling. But at the same time, as a senior minister in the very, very tricky portfolio of education, can she hold her head high?
I guess she was always on a hiding to nothing with that portfolio. It is tricky, and particularly when it comes to the education system failing Māori, it's never going to be easy to turn around. And then when you're trying to sell ideas like bigger classrooms and bulk funding, you're never going to be popular. What I found interesting, though, was when I shared the article on our Hui Facebook page, the vitriolic response we got, 90%, probably more than that, of people are still really scathing and angry towards Hekia. And it reminded me of, and Mikey Sherman mentioned it the other day, at the Matatini National Kapahaka competitions in 2011 when she got up to present an award and was really loudly booed, which was sort of unprecedented at the time for Māori to be so openly hostile towards an MP. And I think in terms of the way she's perceived in Māori, the way she allowed herself to be the front person for the Rau Kumara stuff hurt her within the Māori community. But I think, she's shown that she's a smart woman, she's articulate, she has a lot of money, and I'm sure the people of the East Coast will be very happy to get her home. Yeah. And she'll continue to make a contribution somehow. I mean,
I saw her once. I went to the Transit of Venus stuff that happened in Tolaga Bay and around there, and seeing her in her element on the marae and stuff, she's sort of quite charismatic figure in a way there.
She's very charismatic, and she's very loved within her community and admired, and she comes from a family who have a lot of mana, and I think it can be easy for outsiders not to understand that legacy that comes with her.
Ben, you sort of hinted, joked, intimated before that she may have been shuffled out the door rather than going on of her own accord, but it seems as though it's a legit departure that she's determined. You don't think so?
I absolutely think it's legitimate. You know, if you get the idea that your time is up, your time is up. I think, you know, she early on in her time as a minister, it looked as though her sort of lasting legacy might just be rehabilitating the image of Anne Tolley as education minister. But since then, particularly in her second term as education minister, she really kind of clamped down, performed much better. None of those sort of embarrassing gaffes, you know, getting all of the school principals in Christchurch into a hall and giving them differently coloured stickers and saying, everyone with the green stickers, your schools are remaining open, you know. But she got a much tighter rein on the portfolio after that, and she's performed well. I
do admire Hekia for fronting up. She is a minister who fronts up on issues. You know, she always fronted up on the kohanga stuff. She's the only national cabinet minister to front up on our program this year. So I do admire that about her, that she's prepared to walk her talk.
The other major figure that is away is David Cunliffe, who's got, again, a kind of mixed record. I wrote something for the Spinoff yesterday about him on the memories that sprung to mind, and mostly I felt a bit mean writing it. So, you know, it felt a bit grave dancing, and I got upbraided on Facebook, and that's the way it goes, and that's fine. But the things that stick in the memory are the coup/non-coup, the, you know, slightly over-the-top speeches, the apology for being a man. Ben, is that fair? I mean, he also achieved quite some good stuff, you know, when he was telecoms minister, for example. What's your take on it?
Yeah, look, his enduring legacy will be his work as communications minister. He led the way to the unbundling of the retail side and the network side of telecom. Yeah. So prior to that, telecom had this huge advantage, this monopoly, because it owned all the lines that, you know, where internet provision you know, went through, and they were also an ISP, and this gave them a huge competitive advantage because when you're all squashed together, you can kind of hide the costs, and effectively everyone ends up subsidising your retail arm. Everyone else that needs to use those lines, like other internet service providers. He actually really went out on a limb and got huge plaudits from the business community back in the late 2000s by insisting that telecoms separate those two functions. You know, he was attacked by National at the time, you know, that it was sort of communism by stealth, that sort of thing, a huge, you know, an attack on the free market, that kind of thing. But it's had huge benefits, and it was formalised when the ultra-fast broadband scheme was unveiled by the actual formal separation of Chorus and what's now Spark Telecom. That said, I think Cunliffe, unfortunately, it's his memory sort of it brings to mind an amazing article that John Ronson, the journalist, did, a profile of Insane Clown Posse, where he raised the question of what happens when you're a creative and passionate person who bears your soul to the world, but the majority of people find it ridiculous, and that was really Cunliffe. He could never kind of rein in or control his impulses when he was dealing with people. And it was really unfortunate because I think he's actually a very authentic person. He always gets slammed for being inauthentic or fake. And it's not true. You know, he is a guy who really cares, who really wants to make a difference and just can't convince the outside world of that.
Yeah, he never struck me as a bullshit artist, particularly the occasions when I spoke to him. He seems really sort of straightforward, decent person, but he didn't win the trust of his caucus colleagues, did he, Annabelle?
He just had a bit of a dorky streak, didn't he? That kind of the media loved to seize upon, like the whole "I'm sorry, I'm a man," all of that sort of stuff. But I feel like he's a guy that had a lot to offer, and if the Labour Party wasn't such a bag of snakes that loves to rip each other apart, then, you know, he could have made quite a good contribution, I think. I feel sorry for David Cunliffe, actually.
It's actually a really good point. In Labour, you've got guys like David Cunliffe, and I think Charles Chauvel was another one, and Stuart Nash now in their caucus is another one. These are guys who've got experience in the private sector and an understanding of business and the economy that really their colleagues don't have, and this does actually mark them out with special skills within a Labour caucus. Now, unfortunately, all of these guys know that, and they find it very difficult. They've always found it very difficult to disguise the fact that they have that skill set that their colleagues don't have. Then this does lead to a bit of resentment. And these guys have always had a tough time in that caucus, which is dominated by unionists, teachers, public sector, people like that.
And all of this is for both sides a kind of regeneration exercise as well. I mean, Tamati Coffey is someone who's emerged now, been selected as Labour's candidate in Waiariki. There's the name escapes me. The woman who was in Ohariu last time has been selected in Hutt South.
Jenny Anderson
seat. That's right. I'm talking about Labour, I guess, particularly, but they really struggled with what the UK political watchers call bed blocking. Where there are the metaphor being people in hospital wards who are basically just sort of moved in, and by freeing up a few of these positions, they could do with a few more. Does anyone have a view on whether or not Labour will be better placed to go into the election next year looking a bit fresher?
It really depends on the candidates that they can recruit to replace these guys. They didn't have a great candidate intake last time. One thing that will play a part is the so-called man ban. They'll need, their policy now is to have 50% women in winnable seats. So that means you're very likely to see a woman selected in New Lynn to replace David Cunliffe. That can only be a good thing if they widen the sort of range of people they're looking at. But if Labour are seen to be heading for a defeat, to not be getting a lot of new MPs, they might have a tough time attracting talent.
It's hard to look fresh when you've got Annette King as your number 2, isn't it? I mean, for goodness sake, really?
You mentioned, Annabelle, that Hekia Parata is one of the only minister who's come on the hui this year.
The only national minister we've had, the Ururua, as well.
Okay, you've asked Paula Bennett on a few times, as I recall.
Several times, yep. 20 weeks we've been waiting for Paula to front up.
Did you try
She
calling
can do
her?
The cafe on TV3
Yes,
and numerous other programs of consequence, but not us.
Did you give her a call on the day that she was acting Prime Minister?
I didn't. I should have.
Maybe you should have hit. Well, she was enjoying herself, wasn't she? As Paula Bennett, who's number 5, I think, 5th ranked in cabinet,
5th.
And those above her being John Key, Jerry Brownlee, Stephen Joyce, and Bill English, who I believe is the Deputy Prime Minister, indeed. We're all in Australia or somewhere else around the world. And so she had a day on the job, and she was busy in taking newspaper article requests to appear. Do you think, Annabelle, she's a future Prime Minister?
No. I don't, because I think, the mark of a Prime Minister is leadership. And if you can't front up and have serious interviews about the things that are happening in your portfolio, then you're probably not qualified to be lead the country.
Are you willing to review that opinion if she comes on your show next week?
Absolutely. I will vote for her myself.
Paul, I'm sure you're listening.
I do think that she lacks a bit of depth there, and that you can only play the cutesy bootsy, West Auckland, Cheryl West type figure for so long.
She's toned that down a bit, though, hasn't she?
Yeah, really good piece by Isaac Davison of the Herald.
Oh yeah,
about a profile of Paula, in part assessing her legacy as Prime Minister, but also, also looking at her rise sort of over the last few years, and what that isolated was that she doesn't have a lot of supporters in cabinet or actually in the caucus. She doesn't have a tribe in their faction or anything. She doesn't, and she's been very successful. She was an excellent Minister of Social Development, because she's such an excellent communicator, she has.
Is that as in communicating people's private information to the media? That sort of communicating.
Yeah, that's right. I had actually hoped there might be a lot, a real lift in transparency and OIA sort of responses under Paula, or at least a heads up from her press secretaries about who was facing charges. But at the same time, so she's gotten to number 5, and that's been on the back of strong performances. But at the same time, it's because of patronage. It's from the Prime Minister. Not undeserved patronage, but it's not because she's got a significant support block. And that's what you need. There's no point being John Key's favourite after John Key leaves.
Or you could turn it on its head and say it could be a strength, and that you could come through in a leadership battle without being seen as necessarily aligned with any part of the party.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you hear other people mentioned like that. Amy Adams sometimes comes up in those sorts of discussions as a kind of non-aligned actor who could be a leadership option.
The question that has been said before is whether or not the manner in which a vacancy occurs, because if it seemed to be that John Key has lost favour, which is the normal route by which most leaders and prime ministers fall out of favour, if he's seen to have lost his mojo or whatever, then it will be because it will suddenly be rewritten as because he's too neutral, lacking vision, lacking an ideological backbone. And that's where someone like Judith Collins is well placed, right? Who's now re-established herself. What do you reckon, Annabelle?
Yeah.
What do you reckon? Who's the next national leader?
Joyce would
Steve
be my
Joyce,
pick.
Stephen Joyce.
Next national leader or next national prime minister?
Ooh.
Next national leader, I think it doesn't actually matter so much. For the reasons you outlined.
We could have a caretaker Bill English.
So who's your pick though? For both?
It's really hard to say. Again, I think it comes down to the circumstances. And it's impossible to tell at this sort of stage. The contenders.
He's whipped out of
the contenders we know.
No.
Judith Collins, perhaps Simon Bridges, again Amy Adams, but if it was a kind of caretaker thing, if it was a year till an election, it probably would be Bill English or Stephen Joyce.
Have you noticed that Simon Bridges is channeling? Is it Justin Trudeau?
Justin Trudeau, yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah,
have you noticed that?
Yeah, he's been having photos taken in windswept locations.
With windswept hair.
He's doing pretty well. I mean, he's doing in terms of that kind of modernising branch of the National Party. He's reasonably well placed. I don't know whether or not he's got the gravitas. How do you get gravitas? Mt Roskill. For what it's worth, I think Murray McCully will be the next Prime Minister. Mt Roskill is now, the writs have been issued by the Governor-General. December the 3rd, I think.
December the 3rd, the final day of the Hui.
And the final day of the Hui, there we go. The Labour Party announced, by happy coincidence, plans that for a to accelerate plans for a light railway linking Mt Roskill with, I think, Wynyard Quarter. And immediately there was a cry of pork barrel, bribes, blah, blah, blah. Fair?
By Stephen Joyce, oddly enough, the campaign manager of the Northland by-election last year.
Bridges of Woodstone County.
Who managed to find money for 10 new bridges in that electorate. So I think it's a bit rich.
Although bridges come a fair whack cheaper than a 1.1 billion light railway.
Yeah, I don't think the difference is one of magnitude. I think it's actually one of kind. The Labour promise is one that they will actually have to win an election to give effect to. The National Party bridge bribe last year was something where they pretended that the ordinary business of government was going on when in fact they were trying to bribe a by-election. So, the minister has these kind of independent NZTA goals for spending, on roading. And then they made this announcement with whoever that National Party candidate was for Northland standing next to, the minister. And it was all a bit sort of blurred separation of powers, not particularly kosher. Whereas promising something during an election campaign, sure, that's a bribe, but it's the sort of acceptable kind of bribe that wins elections. It's the same as tax cuts. And it ignores the fact that, Michael Wood winning Mt Roskill, as he almost certainly will, won't actually bring about any light rail. Labour will actually have to get into government for that. My friend Ruani Pereira lives in Mt Roskill, in the Mt Roskill electorate on the Flash side, Hillsborough, and she swears that it's going to be a very, very close electorate. Interesting. And that people will be voting for not necessarily the candidate, but for John Key.
Well, I think we said this in the last podcast that National won the party vote in the seat last time. I think I read somewhere as well that they won the party vote in Newland, which is kind of even more amazing. Well,
Tim Grosser, nothing beats boots on the ground.
Tim Grosser, was a constant presence in Newland, and as I think we were discussing yesterday on the social networks, Ben, remains just as devoted to the constituency of Newland today from Washington as he did when he was busy door knocking in the electorate. What are we talking about? Could be closer, Annabelle. Could be. I mean, I kind of. I do think that they should shut the Labour Party down if they can't hold the seat.
Well, in all seriousness, do you think will he be forced to resign or pushed off the cliff if they lose Mt Roskill?
Oh yeah, look, that would be panic stations. That would be it'd be unprecedented. No sitting government has ever won a seat that it didn't already hold. Michael Wood's a good candidate. I think after the light rail announcement, Parmjeet Palmer was asked what her thoughts were on it as the national candidate, and she said no, there should be more money spent on bus stops. Which you'll recognise as a sort of bastardisation of what the Prime Minister had said, that he thought buses could probably carry the overflow. Yeah. So she hasn't quite got her lines down right from head office, and that's going to get more important, when they start having debates with, once the galleries start flying up and sort of tailing these people all around the suburbs of Roskill.
Yeah. Seemingly nor has Gough.
No, well, that was an interesting thing with Gough, isn't it? And that he immediately rebuffed he immediately said, great, but we're not paying for it. Central government can pay for it.
How annoyed would you be if you were Andrew Little? Like, thanks, Phil. He tried to cover nicely for him on Radio New Zealand and did that's what the Mayor of Auckland would say. But still,
except the argument isn't it that NZTA should be paying for it? I mean, in similar ways, roads of national significance being the...
Look, it wouldn't be a very good election bribe if the government wasn't planning on paying for it. If the government was just promising that they would somehow browbeat Phil Gough into something. But look, Gough campaigned on getting light rail into those suburbs. He's talking about rail to the airport. There's actually a lot of quite big infrastructure spends that Gough was curiously silent about when he was riding at 50% on the polls, heading towards the mayoralty that he's now sort of bringing to light. All of these things are going to have to be partnerships between government and local council. Yeah, and there's no question about that. I don't think there's any sort of real, smackdown or slap in the face from Gough on that. I think that was a bit mischievously reported.
Speaking of mischief, the 757 Boeing aeroplane Key Force One ended up in Townsville for a day in a week in which there was very little political news. Was that an embarrassment? Do you guys feel like that was one of those kind of, Banana Republic moments?
Well, again, I hate to harp on about it, but, in recent months we've been at the United Nations telling everyone to just sort of sort out the Middle East, get Syria under control. And I just sort of imagine, John Key in Townsville sort of texting like, we're on our way. we're coming to save the known world. We just need some parts flowing in, preferably on a plane that isn't part of the New Zealand Air Force. Look, of course, it's ridiculous. All the business leaders who were on the plane got there a day late for all of their business meetings, which were cancelled.
They completely missed the Mumbai part of the trip, which is the main business centre, right?
It's embarrassing to us. I don't know if the rest of the world would care very much.
I did note, speaking of Justin Trudeau, that his plane, which was born for Belgium, had to turn around because it had a mechanical difficulty, which shows you that perhaps Key and Trudeau are closer than
basically twins.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Brother, different mother kind of thing. That's a fascinating story, what was going on with Wallonia. Did you get into the Wallonia stuff, anyone? Holding out on the EU-Canada trade deal? Anyone no one wants to talk about Wallonia. The Hui has done very little on Wallonia lately.
Nothing. I feel ashamed.
But it has done some excellent work on the Nepata brothers, which was also, I think, on Native Affairs going back, and their claims for compensation. Tell us about that story.
So in 1989, George Nepata was dropped during a training incident on his head and became a tetraplegic. Yeah. And 5 days later, while still in hospital,
Singapore?
I think it was in Singapore.
Yeah.
They used his thumbprint to discharge him. He was never given any compensation or an apology. And then 5 years later, his younger brother Damien was horrifically burnt in a Scorpion tank accident. It later turned out that they really shouldn't have been using Scorpion tanks anyway in Wairodu, because they're reconnaissance vehicles that are designed for sort of zipping around quickly in the desert, not, to be used as a four-wheel drive in the wop-wops of Wairodu. And he too never received an apology or compensation, and it's been before two select committees. Labor turned it down in the early 2000s, and then National, we sort of started a bit of a campaign when I was on Native Affairs and got the Māori Affairs Select Committee to agree to have another inquiry into it. They recommended then that the brothers should get compensation, and it was turned down by Woodhouse, was it? Is that right? Whoever was the Minister of Veteran Affairs at the time. And so now they are a part of a claim before the Waitangi Tribunal, Māori vets.
Yeah.
And they gave compelling and heart-wrenching evidence last week before the tribunal, and hopefully they may get an apology or something that way. Although it'd be pretty meaningless this many years later to finally be offered an apology
the tribunal,
when it's been forced.
The tribunal can't compel the government to pay compensation, though.
No, they can
make a recommendation.
Yeah. Would it be the kind of recommendation that would have the force, a moral force? I mean, obviously there's a moral force, but would it? I'm trying to think whether or not there's any precedent for that, because the government has ignored Waitangi Tribunal recommendations before. Yeah,
look, it depends how broad it is. A lot of the historical reports will come out with recommendations, that ownership of new petroleum in New Zealand waters is returned to Māori, and that has not been acted on. It depends how granular they get, how achievable, essentially, I think, in a lot of cases. The government will always consider these things carefully and try and do something that's, at least in line with redressing any breaches that have been found, whether it's exactly the same or not. Sometimes they'll conclude that, alternative action has already been taken, which sort of, kind of substitutes for it.
Ben, quickly, Sir Jerry Mataparai's coat of arms had you in a whirl of excitement, to the extent that you wrote a piece for the popular website, the Spinoff.co.nz.
Yeah, probably the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. Governors General of New Zealand are entitled to... Nice
use of the Governors General.
Thank you. Like, for the Governors General, did you Google that? Like plural for Governor General, because most would say Governor Generals. So how did you know that it's Governors General?
I did Google. Both are correct.
So cool.
Both are correct.
It really is annoys me when people say referenda. That to me is a sign of someone who's trying a bit too hard. I'm good with Governors General, that's fine, but don't say referenda say referendums.
Oh, really?
I love Governors General. I'm just totally in awe. It knocked my socks off when I read it.
Nothing wrong with referendum.
I feel that when you're dealing with the Governor General, you should really have as many kind of frills and moving parts, and as much pageantry as possible. I think Sir Jerry, they don't have much in their lives, Governors-General. They spend most of their time sort of sitting on a stage, listening to people introduce them, or the speeches that come after them. It's really a sort of gilded cage kind of situation. A butterfly under glass, our Sir Jerry. And at the end of it, part of the payoff they get is they get a coat of arms. And traditionally, this is sort of, griffins and dragons and some sort of Latinate high school slogan, whereas Sir Jerry's is a picture of him and his wife holding their family cat, Boots.
I also like the giant fantail looming above them like a great hawk that's like bigger than all of them, that could like lift them and tear them limb from limb. And I also like that he has on like, if the crocodile hunter had a number one's uniform for like formal occasions, that's what Jerry's wearing in the coat of arms.
It is pretty great.
It's very New Zealand. It's a very New Zealand coat of arms, and it really sort of sums up Sir Jerry, who was a very good Governor-General.
I just wish there was like an open packet of fish and chips at their feet.
Power shell ashtray.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
We're going to wind it up because Ben particularly is almost dragging himself out the door to go and read that auditor-general report on Saudi sheep.
Wait, you had one more important question to ask us.
Before we go, has anyone got? I'm interested to hear your views on the controversy surrounding Max Key. That's Gone By Lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhire. Thanks, Annabelle Lee, Ben Thomas and Madeline Chapman for producing. See you next time.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.